Well, hello again. This is Stefan Senna, and welcome to my channel, The Coherence Path. All roads lead to you. I guess I'll try to get you a decent view of the river there, but a little different one. This video is going to be on the subject of how to become less focused on detail and realism when you're doing art. Now, I don't know how well this technique or these techniques will apply to anything else, but there's probably a way to translate it into other interests. But so on this channel, I talk mostly about consciousness, about my near-death, out-of-body experiences, other strange things that I've had happen. I share my art that I've been doing since 1997 that is visionary. I'm not saying it's, woo, it's visionary, it's going to change your life. No, I'm just saying I experienced these visions. It's been happening since I had that out-of-body experience or near-death experience, whatever you want to call it, 1997. So I talk about my art, what it means to me, and then I'm also going to share the art, and if people want to use it as a meditative tool, they can. And then part of the discussion, I thought, well, let's talk about art and techniques. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that I don't consider myself a great artist. I mean, especially with Instagram nowadays, I am just floored, just amazed by just the beauty of people's artistic talents. And has nothing to do with proficiency in technique or detail or any of that stuff. It's really about the expression of a unique vision. And that's something that I struggle with all my life, is creating unique visions for myself as far as my art. But anyway, I have tutored art a little bit. When I was in college, I did two things to earn a living because I had been in bed for about 2.5 to 3 years from an auto accident and a neck injury. And I needed a way to make a living, but not something to put me, into a tight schedule, like working 8 hours of whatever, because I would still get really exhausted. So I tutored English as a second language, mostly did pronunciation with foreign students by the hour, and I also would tutor math or art. And so I remember this one student that came to me, and she was, I think it was a house or an office building. I can't remember what she was painting or wanting to paint. And but she was hyper focused on the detail of all the tiny little bricks, the mortar lines, the composition, wanting to get everything just perfect and photo realistic. And I think I asked her, like, well, what kind of art do you like to look at? Why don't you bring me a bunch of examples of that? Not the kind of art that you necessarily want to create, but the art that you like to look at. And then why don't we talk about why you like those works of art and so forth. So we did that, and I remember she brought all these examples of art that were more along the lines of Impressionism. And so illustrations or paintings were very loose, you know, like Monet or Van Gogh. And she explained why she liked them. I said, well, I said, in this lesson that you're wanting me to help you with, you're very much motivated and focused on the detail. And, you know, because she's wanting to use a ruler and measure everything. And I said, yet the art that you like is not like that at all. It has there's not a rough edge on any of it. It's all out of focus. That was the whole point of Impressionism, is just to make an impression of what you saw or experienced more. And she goes, well, I just couldn't do that. I just couldn't, you know, I just have to get it really detailed. And I said, well, have you ever done anything out of focus? You know? Have you ever just, you know, if you're trying to do a sphere as an exercise, just do a blob, you know? What would a apple look like after it's rolled down a mountain for about an hour? You know, it's not going to look like an apple anymore. It's going to look like a blob. It's going to be out of focus. She goes, well, yeah, I'd really like to loosen up and do more art like the ones that I like, but I just get so hung up on the detail. I said, that's all right. So I can't remember what it was. Was it a chair? Well, I think it was more than that. I think we practiced with a couple different objects. She also happened to, her and her husband lived in the apartment building I lived in at the time. And I had moved and was in a different location. And anyway, there's my little lure. I don't know where it went. Down there somewhere. Anyway, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I can help you at least with some ideas of how, some exercises that can help you loosen up. So I think we picked a chair first. We were in our dining room. I said, why don't you draw that chair? And I knew what I was going to do, but I didn't say anything. I just let her go about drawing the chair. And she, you know, after about 10 minutes, I stopped her. I said, okay. I said, let's look at your chair. And she had only, and she did some erasing back and forth. She had only successfully lightly put in just a part of the chair. And I asked her how she felt about that. She goes, well, I don't know if it looks right. You know, I don't know if, you know, the angle is right. I don't know if these lines are right. I said, all right. I said, how long do you think it'll take you? And she said, I don't know. This might take me a couple weeks. And I was pretty confident that based on some of her drawings I saw, that yeah, she could draw that chair really well if she wanted. I said, okay, well, here's the exercise. That was a warm-up. I said, what if I just give you 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, and you have to draw that chair, but you have to draw the entire chair, not just like this little section you've accomplished here in 10 minutes. I want you to draw the entire chair. And that was highly overwhelming for her, and she didn't know how she was going to do that. So I gave her another 10 minutes, and she had drawn a lot more of the chair and with less detail, but she didn't get the whole chair. And then I said, okay, we're going to do this again. I'm going to give you 10 minutes, but you have to draw the entire chair. You have to draw the legs of the chair, the arms of the chair, the back of the chair. You have to draw it all. She says, I don't know how I'm going to do that. And I said, well, you don't have to draw it in detail, but I want an impression of that chair. I want to see the whole chair. I don't want to guess what you're drawing. I want to know that, oh, okay, you drew a chair. That's definitely a chair, you know. And this lure looks really cool in the water. It looks like a little fish. I don't know if I showed that to you yet. It's one I had on the other day. Mimics a little fish. I guess a minnow. I should name this minnow. Let's see. What's a good name for a lure that's a little fish? How about Moby? Like Moby the Dick? Isn't that yeah, it's a story about a whale. Well, maybe this little minnow, Moby, will bring me a whale. So she was very emotionally distraught that she only had 10 minutes to draw the entire chair. And I said, listen, I said, this is the point of the exercise. I want you to draw the entire chair. And so I said, okay, go. So this time she ends up drawing the whole chair. Now, what do you think was present in that drawing versus the very first one she started? Well, the answer is there were lines that were a little sketchy, a little blurry. There were areas where things were a little, out of focus. Things were not, particularly dimensional in the sense that how we see them with our eyes. Just like Van Gogh's chair in that, he did this painting of the inside of a pool room. There's a pool table, and there's chairs, and everything in that painting's a little bit skewed. And her chair kind of looked like that. So I said, you're doing great. I told her, you're doing great. You're doing exactly, fulfilling the exact purpose of the lesson. I said, how do you feel? You just drew an entire chair in 10 minutes. How do you feel? And she said she felt, if I remember right, she said she felt like, wow, I just feel a little bit looser, like I don't have any control whether I make a mistake or not because I don't really have time to think about it. I said, yeah, that's a pretty reasonable and common response to that. I think lure's doing something funny. It must be, the line must be messed up on the thing. Yeah, it is. But so then I said, well, I want you to do the chair again. Or pick something else. I can't remember if she picked something else or she did the chair again. It was so many years ago. And at that time, I was just getting over an inner ear injury where I had no short-term memory storage. And there's a lot of things I don't remember. But anyway, what was I saying? So I said, now the exercise progresses. I want you to draw, whatever it was, chair or whatever she drew. I said, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And her eyes got big and she didn't know how she's going to do that. She was anxious. But she was willing. So in 5 minutes, she made another drawing. And I said, okay, let's do it again. But this time you have a minute. And oh my God, she was like, that's not enough time. There's no way. How am I going to do that? You could just see all this in her eyes. She was taking deep breaths and letting them out. She was physically agitated. It was a shock to her system because she'd never thought about that. And that's okay. I learned it from a teacher. I didn't make this stuff up. So I'm no art guru, that's for sure. I'm not a guru in any sense, that's for sure. But so anyway, I gave her just a minute, and then I gave her 30 seconds. And we did that several times, and then I said, but now you got 10 seconds. Then we went down to 5 seconds. And she was able to illustrate, to render an object, though blurry, but you could tell what it was. Now, I don't know, I've never tried this myself with people. I don't know if you can, I guess there's those people that sit out on the street in big cities and they'll draw people. It'll take them just 10 minutes and they'll draw a caricature of a person. So yeah, it can be done in a short amount of time, even so you can identify the person. But so if your own artwork seems to have you trapped in this world of self-criticism and judgment and high, whatever your standards are not allowing you to loosen up and, become more free with creativity. Yeah, I used to think that when you did this exercise, you were unleashing your subconscious mind and it was taking over. Well, we don't have a subconscious mind. All we're doing is allowing our greater self, the artist in us, the one who can dance smoothly across the dance floor, drive a nice car around a nice curve, do gymnastics, catch a football. These graceful moments where we just go into a flow state, where our consciousness experiences no major resistance or repression in response to the particular thing we're doing or thinking, and we just flow. Throwing this line out with this fishing pole is a good example, because every time you cast this lure or whatever you cast out. I was a little kid, I used to practice with a weight just down the street. When you cast out, it's a direct result of the flow of your energy out to that point. Unless you hit a tree or a rock along the way, you can't blame it on anything else. And so that exercise helps you disconnect from the repression. If you do a lot of self-judging toward your art, it can be that that greater part of you that on some level you're capable, or some level you're aware that you're capable of actually doing something fun with the art, you're repressing that part of you because you're so concerned about doing it right. But this exercise allows you to you don't have time. You can't create a photorealistic image of a chair or whatever the heck it is in 10 seconds. You just can't. It's physically impossible. And so it allows you to let go and just accept that, okay, in this state, over this process of time, my consciousness can have fun and render what it renders, however it freely does that without any repression or restriction, and the end result will be what it is. Like those Japanese calligraphers that use those big brushes on the paper, and the art is the result of those big heavy brushes dipped in the ink across those large scrolls of rice paper, and how it ends up being is the result, and it is the art. And they practice on, I don't know if they practice on scrap paper for years to do that, but it's that one moment when they become proficient at it that they just do it and it's perfect. At least that's viewed by those who are interested in it as, artistic. And so they practice and practice and practice and practice. Well, a person who does highly detailed renders of art, you're already practiced enough. If you could draw a photorealistic face or building, you don't need to practice anything. What you need to do is just, in my humble opinion, because this was my problem, what I needed to do was I needed to allow myself the opportunity to feel more what I was doing as I did art. But I didn't know how to do that. I was incapable. I did not have the internal tools to even understand what that was. I just noticed the difference. I say, okay, there's a piece of my art that's dry and boring and heartless and no real personal imprint on it. And then there's a Van Gogh, the most imprinted emotional art you could probably bring up in this subject. And so if you are hyper focused on detail and you want to loosen up as an artist, try the exercise. It's not going to hurt anything. Just use some scrap paper, whatever. I don't care. There's the philosophy or the idea of happy accidents, that while you're doing something might happen out of that you didn't expect, and that could be applied to many different things, but especially in art. When you're playing around with the colors, you're pushing the colors this way and that way and the brushes, and you're making this, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, that's that thing, that one thing right there, that is cooler than all the rest of the things on the canvas. I want to focus on that because it's just a happy accident, and that stuff happens. So when we can allow ourselves to explore these happy accidents, then we just accept our own power as creative beings. We accept that we can embody and make choices that are more enjoyable for us to create. And if it's palatable and interesting and wonderful to other people, that's great. But it's about the artist. It's about whoever's doing the process. It's not about anybody else, because that's called a product. Let's make a widget that everybody likes. They'll buy it. And that's a product. A work of art, to me, a work of art can be a landscape painting that you sell or use in some competition or whatever. Yes, you can create art that ends up to be products. But my point is that for the process of doing the art, in order to really put your heart into it, you have to let go of some stuff. You have to let go of self-judgment, self-analysis, some of the high expectations you might have for yourself and the subject itself, and look deeper and freer at your own consciousness and what it wants to communicate. Because you never know what can happen with a happy accident. That's it for today. I may or may not continue fishing. I haven't had a bite today. But it's been fun trying out some new lures. I've tried 3 new things. Bet all the videos, all the fisher people, even out here on the same river, there's people that videotape themselves fishing, catching fish with these lures. So it all just depends on whether the fish are in the mood, But I appreciate you stopping by my channel, The Coherence Path. All roads do lead to you. They lead to me, you, and everybody else. And it's all an inside job. So if this technique or idea can be helpful, then maybe extrapolate the idea out into any subject or genre you can think of. It would apply to filmmaking. It really would apply to anything, pretty much. Even a corporation could use this idea. And maybe I'll take that as one of my subject for one of my videos, because that would be probably a longer conversation. But anyway, thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time.